Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joel Stone speaking. Uh, I'm a member of the advisory board for business climate leaders, and I'll be kicking things off today. First of all, we appreciate all of you who are attending today's event to learn the importance of soil health and how it can offer a solution to climate restoration through carbon sequestration. We especially want to recognize the farmers who are participating and let them know how much we appreciate their hard work and sacrifice to make our lives so carefree in regards to food security and supply. Citizens Climate Lobby, or as we call it CCL, is an international NGO with some 200,000 volunteers, mostly in Canada and the US, with coverage in every congressional district. Our current focus is carbon fee and dividend legislation that levies a fee on the CO2 equivalent of fossil fuels and returns the revenue to households. The legislation is titled the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. CCL also supports other bipartisan bills that promote sector-specific initiatives, such as the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which directly impacts some of our discussion today. Business Climate Leaders is an action team of CCL. Our mission is to engage businesses from diverse sectors of the economy in promoting the legislation and policies that CCL supports. Today, we focus on food and agriculture and have the expertise at the table to provide answers and best available science to some pressing questions from the public. In terms of our panel members, first off, we've got Finian Makepeace. Finian is the co-founder and lead educator of the Kiss the Ground group. He will start us off with a brief summary of what we have learned about soil health, also referred to as regenerative agriculture, and the benefits it provides to the ecosystem and our personal health. Finian will then co-moderate the conversation. Christine Morgan, who's joined us today, is a soil scientist and the chief science officer of the Soil Health Institute. She will provide an overview of the metrics being used to assess what are the current emissions of conventional food production. Christine will also elaborate on what the capacity of the soil to sequester carbon, assuming a conversion to soil health practices. With carbon markets emerging and becoming more attractive, Hunter Stone will update us on the latest in technology and processes to measure carbon in the soil. What is current thinking for measurements? And what are cost-effective, reliable, and equitable across a variety of operations, from small to multi-crop, specialty crop, and large-scale row crops. Trey Hill joins us. Trey has years of experience using soil health practices for his 13,000-acre farm. He will provide us with an overview of the opportunities and many challenges farmers are facing to convert from conventional to regenerative, both in terms of time and investment, as well as access to new markets. Klaus will co-moderate with the discussion with Finian. He has spent a lifetime in the hospitality industry designing large-scale food systems. How will these changes in agricultural practices impact the entire supply chain, often referred to as from farm to fork? So with that, again, welcome to the event, and I will turn the floor over to Klaus.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. First of all, I wanted to point out an administrative thing for your questions. Please use the Q&A. We're using the chat for our own panelist conversation, and it's turned off to the audience. But we have a team on standby to look at your questions and answer some as they come along and pass others into our conversation. So with that, we wanted to kick it off and hand it over to Finian as an introduction. So in our last panel discussion, we reviewed the Kiss the Ground documentary to learn about soil science and the capacity of soil to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Finian, give us a brief summary on what are the key learnings that we discussed in our last session.
Thank you, Klaus. Thank you, everyone, for joining from all over the place. It's really great to be here. I'm going to do my best to do a quick synopsis. Today, I have a very short window of time, so I'm going to use some slides to share with you some of the key things that are important, I think, for all of us to have and consider as we move forward together in this amazing, exciting movement around soil health and regenerative agriculture and the potential of carbon sequestration. So without further ado, if Joel, if you can put up my slides, or if you want me to share, just let me know. And while we're waiting, I just want to bring into our awareness that this is a growing movement that is so dependent and interconnected with farmers and ranchers on the front lines of this movement, with scientists who've been working tirelessly to make this information improve the validity of what everything we're talking about. So why I'm starting with this first slide here, this is a gentleman named Ray Archuleta. Some of you might recognize him. Some of you might have seen him in Kiss the Ground, the movie. If we can hit on slide 2, please. Next slide. Ray is saying in this slide, we didn't know how the soil worked. And here is someone who went to school for agriculture and soil science, worked with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, for over 25 years, and was on the front lines of working with farmers and ranchers on soil health. Can we go to the slide there? Is that possible? Whoever's controlling slides, thank you. Am I controlling them? I don't know. I don't think so. But why I'm pointing this out is that this is a really critical framing so that when we're looking to our communication with our representatives, which so many of you are doing, with our business leaders, with people who are in this field, this idea is emerging so rapidly and is happening, and the understanding of how it works was really vacant in so many areas. So I put this out there to remind us that so many people, someone's taking over the slide deck, thank you all. So many people didn't really grasp how the soil worked. And so that's where, when we start from that premise, we start from a clean slate saying, it's okay. Humanity has been largely unaware. Many indigenous cultures worked as stewards in a regenerative mindset and had those outcomes. But in terms of the technical science around what's happening under our feet, the fungi, the bacteria that are working with plants to sequester carbon, a lot of that is relatively new. So next slide. And here are the basics from Kiss the Ground, the movie. We hope you got this profound inspiration of we can do this. And the fundamentals of that is that the problem right now, too much carbon in the atmosphere, one of the problems, is the solution. We need that carbon to rebuild healthy soil. So the problem, the carbon overload, is the stuff we need to rebuild soil. Next slide. And what that means is when we recognize this is part of this unearthing of this science that was relatively unknown, untalked about, not in a lot of textbooks for college or high school, is that 30 to 40% of the liquid carbohydrates that a plant's making during photosynthesis, it's not just using that to build its own body, it's exuding, it's leaking out 30 to 40% of those liquid sugars into the ground to feed microbes. Next slide. These microbes are utilizing this to live and go through their life cycles, but they're also creating gluey substances from fungi, bacteria, to many other organisms in the soil food web. They're creating gluey substances that structure soil together, bind it into these incredibly amazing architected, aggregated soil structures that can hold 20 times their weight in water, that can house millions and billions of organisms and allow for nutrient uptake for plants. So this is this 500 million years of research and development that plants and soil organisms have been going through. That is the carbon storage process. Plants pump in liquid sugar, carbon, and the organisms use that carbon to create these glues and build this soil structure. So fundamentally, we were missing in our science, in our textbooks for for such a long time how a vast majority of the really good stored carbon, the stuff that lasts longer and goes to depth and doesn't turn back over into CO2 really quickly, gets stored in the soil. Next slide. So this is it in a really simple slide. It's basically like on the right, you have nature's technology, nature's evolution of how to have a net carbon gain. Carbon's pumped in, even when more biology, more life occurs in the soil and they consume that carbon, they're putting up carbon dioxide, but plants figure that out. They have a way to absorb that carbon dioxide that's coming up, turn it back into the liquid carbon, pump it back down, and create a net carbon gain. When we have bare soil, as we see on the left, we're dealing with net carbon loss. This is, again, very basic, just to remind people that when we mimic nature, when we start to move over here, we can have our land working really proficiently to sequester carbon and have a net positive gain because nature designed itself to do so. Next slide. This also has to do with water. When we have that aggregated spongy soil created, we have, and protected with plants, we have net water gains where we're helping transpiration versus runoff, compaction, and evaporation happen when we have bare ground. Again, these are just fundamentals for us all to remind ourselves when we talk about the opportunities that are before us with carbon markets, et cetera. Go ahead, next slide. We also talk about this idea of fertility. People get really excited about the human health aspects of this. What is made available nutrient-wise if we don't have life in the soil? Most micronutrients, trace minerals, are made available because of organisms in the soil making those nutrients available for plants. So when we have desertification, dead soil, we have more heat, we have more death of those soil microorganisms. Everything starts to desertify itself. On the other hand, when we create this feedback loop with plants pumping in liquid sugars, creating the sponge for more water, we have more plant available water, we have more evaporation, transpiration through plants. This is the regenerative cycle of life coming. Next slide. And this is why really at the essence of this, as we get into these very big, but also finite conversations around carbon markets and how we're advancing this stuff, in general, we have to maximize photosynthesis. As I was saying, the more the plants are capturing energy from the sun, using the carbon from the atmosphere and pumping that carbon into the ground to feed the microbes, that sets off a regenerative feedback loop. The more that those microbes can proliferate, the more glues they create, the more they aggregate the soil, the more water they can hold, the more minerals they can make available to them through the soil. And then, of course, yes, that means more photosynthesis, more carbon coming back into the soil. That's that regenerative positive feedback loop. Next slide. And this is just a case point. Farmer Brown, star of Kiss the Ground, the movie as well, going from 1.7 to 7.9% soil organic matter. That's meaning from the time he really got into regenerative agriculture, he's less than or equal to 527 tons of carbon per acre is how much he's sequestered into his land and still has there. That's his total per acre. That means over 140,000 gallons more per acre of water being able to be absorbed and retained. And of course, financially, Gabe is doing incredibly well with such huge reductions in all his input costs and also multiple markets and stacking enterprises. Next slide. We can regenerate Earth. And here's my top 10 list of things that can happen when we really make sure that we're doing this right and helping farmers to do so. Next slide. We can reverse global warming. Like I said before, the really big part of this is to build the soil, to build Gabe's soil back, to make that happen across the world. That's going to take a significant amount of global warming, which we'll be talking about more in a second. We can reduce flooding and drought, of course, rebuilding the soil sponge, making it so we can absorb and retain that water versus letting it flood and run off. We can reduce fire hazards. We can reduce toxic pesticides and fertilizers, reduce dead zones and water pollution. We can revive farmer prosperity. This is so crucial when farmers are able to see a better way because they're reducing their input cost and harming their environment far less. We can replenish our fresh water sources, we can recreate regional access to nutrient-dense food, and we can recover biodiversity and reconnect indigenous knowledge that held a lot of this stewardship mentality to begin with. So next slide. I encourage you all to get involved and take your advocacy to the next level. Kiss the Ground has worked for the last 8 years on getting the information, working with the leaders of this field to make this information more available to you. So I encourage anyone out there to join Kiss the Ground Soil Advocate Training as a place to really leverage and get heavily involved in this movement. And that's it. Next slide for me. But thank you, Klaus. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this discussion today.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. So next question then goes to Christine, wanting to look at the science of things. Can we shift to this picture? I'm okay. So Christine, the question that is very frequently asked here: if agriculture has the capacity to both reduce its emissions and sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, what is the best available soil science regarding what are the current rates of emissions, as a percent of total CO2e? What is the capacity of agriculture to sequester carbon? What are we talking about in terms of numbers, gigatons? And when we are combining these values, what is the total potential rate of reduction that agriculture can contribute to CO2 emissions modification? So let's go ahead with Christine then.
All right, thanks, Klaus. And thank you, Joel, for inviting me to speak with people today. Next slide, please. So the first question that Klaus and Joel asked me to address is essentially, what is the U.S. greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture? What component of U.S. emissions? So I'll first say, Fidian showed pictures of the globe, and I was asked to talk specifically to U.S. agriculture. So I have limited my analysis today to just the United States. So the EPA, U.S. EPA has estimated that in 2019, agriculture was roughly 10% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Of this 10%, this graph here on the left-hand side shows you a little bit about where that's coming from. And so about 28% is enteric fermentation. That's coming from cows primarily. 13% from manure management. A much smaller percentage here, this little red slice of the pie, talks about rice cultivation and urea fertilization and liming and burning of ag residues. But you can see that a vast, a little over 50% of all this has emissions comes from agricultural soil management. So, tillage emissions and things like that. So that's just kind of give you an idea, first of all, what percent, what is the contribution of agriculture? What is it emitting? And what is it coming from? And so this gives you an idea that field cultivation component is about a little over 50%. And those are the emissions. And some of that links up with what Finian was talking about. When we till the soil and remove the plants, that that has some negative effects too on the soil carbon. Next slide. So the next thing we did is at the Soil Health Institute, we did a little modeling to try to understand if there is adoption of what we call soil health management practices or practice that will improve soil carbon, what exactly is that impact look like, especially as a percentage of the ag emissions component. And so just so that you know, there are about 29 recognized practices that are funded by the USDA and NRCS for reducing carbon emissions. But we took kind of the 4 big ones. One is prescribed grazing. I think that's what Gabe Brown does some of that, as I understand it. Practices such as adding cover crops and stopping tillage. And then a very big important one that we often forget to talk about is nitrogen management, which is requires or runs around only applying the nitrogen that you need, using soil health management practices to kind of tighten up that nitrogen cycle so the system is less leaky, meaning, you know, that the extra nitrogen goes into the atmosphere, into our water resources. So right now, on the modeling that we did, we took acres available for that are actively managed in agriculture. So it's about 396 million acres in row crop and 655 million acres in the U.S. in grazing. And then we looked at the current adoption rates. These are reported by the U.S. Ag Census and the ERS. And this gives you a, you know, roughly if we have these percent adoption rates on the right-hand side, here in the middle, we have the total acreage that is, you know, adopted as of 2019 using Ag Census data. Next slide. And so what we did is we took on the y-axis here is million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emitted per year. And so about 600 million, it's a little bit more than that on the EPA recommendations, but roughly 600 million metric tons are emitted in agriculture. And so we just assume with this red line over time, over 20 years, that emission stays somewhat constant. It did increase, I think, by about 1% in the year before 2019, but hopefully that will remain constant. And then what we assumed is we assumed linear adoption rates. So every year we have more adoption of those acreages of these different management practices. And by the year 2040, we have 100% adoption, right? So this is really hoping that we can get 100% of adoption of those 4 major practices. And if you look at the orange line, that's just going to prescribed grazing. So we've done we've put a lot of carbon in the soil by just using prescribed grazing practices. And the next is the yellow line as we move down on this emissions level is prescribed grazing and nitrogen management. And then we come to those practices that Finian was referring to, which is reducing the tillage and cover cropping. And that gets us about to net zero annual emissions for 2040. So what this means, just in a nutshell, is that if we had 100% adoption over 20 years at a linear increase in adoption, that eventually that U.S. agriculture could become net zero in its emissions through both carbon sequestration and nitrogen management. Okay, I think, yeah. Next slide, please. But there's more to improving soil health than carbon. And I put this out there because it's just really important to recognize that there's co-benefits of carbon sequestration in soils. One of them is water cycling. Finian mentioned, you know, he talked about improving water quality. I mean, when he listed the important reasons of things that we can do with improved regenerative ag practices. Here is an example. This is a picture from South Dakota. On the left-hand side, we have a soil that's in conventional practices. And on the right-hand side, it's a soil, at least is in no-till. And this is after a rainfall, photo taken by someone in the NRCS after a rainfall. And what you can see on the right-hand side, really no evidence of rain. And on the left-hand side, the soil is shiny looking. That's because the aggregates have been kind of mushed out. And so we have kind of a surface sealing effect that's going to happen when this water dries off the field. In the back, hopefully you can see there's some erosion going on. And so really what's happening is on the right-hand side, the water is being captured by the field, storing that water for the plants to use during the growing season. And also that water is not being moved in short-circuited into our groundwater or our surface water, and including perhaps some nutrient and soil runoff erosion. Next slide, please. And this further illustrates the point. This is data coming out of the Soil Health Institute, a project that we just recently completed. And then on the y-axis here is changes in available water holding capacity of the soil. So this is the water that's held by the soil in between rainfalls. Plants get their water from the soil. And so the more water we're holding, then the less risk that we have for drought impact on our plants. So this gives us an indication of some drought resilience. We recognize that soils are different, and in this particular model, On the x-axis, we've included clay content to express how, soils can increase in clay content over time. And these blue lines are empirical fits to actual data that's collected. And what we're seeing is that as we increase our organic carbon content from 1 to 4%, which is about roughly 2 to 8% soil organic matter, that we can significantly increase our plant available water holding capacity. The important thing to note that these are changes in soil organic carbon due to management, primarily cover cropping and no-tilling. And so no-tilling not only increases the soil organic carbon, because the soil is not disturbed and it's allowed to organize into its more natural aggregation and soil structure, we can also hold more plant available water. So that's another kind of co-benefit. Next slide. We also, of course, know that we impact carbon cycling. So here is a prescribed versus continuous grazing system. Again, we have the fence line on the left-hand side, continuous, on the right side, rotational grazing. And then these inserts is I've pulled out pictures of the soil cores. So these are the soil, the surface is up top. And what you can see is in the rotational grazing, we have more carbon in the soil, and that's expressed visually through the darker soil. Next slide. This is a great paper that just came out, published by Nicoloso and Chuck Rice. And I just pulled this figure because I thought it was great. This is a global meta-analysis of the effective tillage in legume cover crops from 0 to 60 centimeters deep. So the really nice thing about this meta-analysis that is unique is it's not just looking at the surface, it's looking deeper into the soil. And on average, the data that's being represented here is about 11 years of adoption. And the most important thing that you can note here overall on the top of this graph is that tilled soils don't have changes in carbon stocks compared to the baseline, whereas no-tilled have increased the carbon stocks by about 5 megagrams of carbon per hectare. And again, this is over 11 years. And then the cool thing that I really like about this graph is it also shows the effect of increasing our crop diversity. So from single cropping to double cropping. And so we have the effect of if you till but increase your crop variability, we can increase carbon. If you have no till and you go from single to double crop, you increase even more. And it also illustrates the importance of a cover crop that's leguminous. In fact, that it puts more nitrogen into the soil, which also allows for more carbon capture. Next slide. So that's a little science. It was a bit sciencey, but I think I'm passing it off to the next speaker. And this is a slide I love to show. It's very fuzzy here, but it gives you an idea. Like we know we can sequester carbon by changing management, but I just want to give you an idea. The next thing we're going to talk about is measuring it, measuring this change in carbon. It's complicated. It's really important that we are able to measure it, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what that variability looks like. On the left-hand side is just a 60-hectare farm field, and we looked at the carbon concentration now in the top 10 centimeters. And the thing to note here is this carbon concentration is changing from 0.5 to 4% in space. And then on the right-hand side, again, on the x-axis, we have carbon concentration and soil depth. And then we have the solid dots on the right-hand side. Those are a no-till, and the open dots line is a soil profile, carbon profile of conventional tillage. And we can see that we have an increase in soil carbon, but look how small it is. It's a 0.2% increase. And so we have fields where we know the carbon can vary by 0 to 4%, which is a small variance actually. And then we know that our management is making a 0.2% change over a few years. And that change also varies with depth. And I think with that, just kind of leave the thought that we're measuring something really small. The reason why it's so impactful on the carbon cycling is the multiplier of acres. And I think this is just kind of one of the scientific challenges that we have in soil science, though I think that we're developing a lot of nice technologies right now that will overcome this. Thanks,
Hey, Chris,
Klaus.
Well, thank you, Christine. Yeah, and perfect segue over to Hunter. So Hunter is going to talk about the technology that is being applied here and that is available to be applied. So Hunter, the question that we asked you is there, in regard to measuring carbon in the soil accurately, reliably, cost effectively, so that all types of farmers can participate in the developing carbon markets, what is the latest science and technology in carbon measurements? So I'll kick it over to Hunter from here.
Hi, Klaus. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this panel. I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit about the technologies that play into these carbon markets. If you'll forward the slide, please. Yeah, so I think it's important to consider a well-rounded thought process on how growers are incentivized into ecosystem services. So I like to compare both the inset and offset marketplaces. Inset meaning it's basically a net carbon footprint or greenhouse gas footprint approach where you're saying, okay, let's reduce the intensity of our management, whether that's through reduced nitrogen, which has a huge carbon intensity footprint just by virtue of of the way it's created. And then also you can think of farm implements and those sorts of things. There are programs that directly incentivize growers paying per bushel of grain for just doing things that reduce that greenhouse gas footprint on their farm in the very near term. And what we're talking about today is more on this offset side, where it's a little bit decouples the grain supply chain from what the grower is being incentivized to do. We found in our member base at Farmers Business Network and through our gradable programs that combining these two has a lot of this co-benefit feedback loop that we're talking about in general, that if you can get growers thinking in near term and get these incentives going near term, it'll have a compounding effect to have these long-term offset thinking. So soil health really has both effect in the near term and long term, and stacking those type of payments from doing things to reduce just overall input cost and field traffic really pays benefits on improving soil health in the long term. Next slide, please. A lot of the data feeds that are needed to quantify, measure, and monitor these type of farm practices and for marketplace verification are things growers already are collecting. Some of those would include like machine control data sets, so how much fuel burn is happening, application rates, how much fertilizer, particularly nitrogen, is being applied. And then you've got things that are more management focused, like what crops are grown, what tillage practices were used, and other management factors. Those are critically important to being engaged in these offset markets. Our process as a project developer for carbon markets has been to enroll a grower, get this practice history from them, develop a practice change plan, and then we go ahead and start doing this sort of quantification work where we'll go and collect actual field samples to measure soil organic carbon through a laboratory process. That will set the baseline given their near recent practice history and their plans. We'll continue to get updates from the growers on what's being done, and then we have credits that are issued, and those are available to be transacted on these carbon marketplaces. This seems very straightforward and very simple. It's far from that. There's a lot of confusion on methods. There's a lot of confusion on what is going to be satisfactory to participate in these carbon markets. And overall, is that the farmer's responsibility? And I think the answer is often no. And it's really up to people that are helping facilitate these programs to reduce the data burden for growers, using whatever is the most effective, most cost-effective, most low intensity but highest accuracy data collections that can be done. Next slide, please. So a couple of examples of that are, using something like an Earth Observatory satellite, something like Sentinel from the EU space programs or Landsat from NASA. Using these things, we can develop crop rotation histories. We can look at land use change. All of those are critical to defining whether a grower's fields are eligible for participating in some of these programs, and also defining the baseline of, how did this grower arrive at the soil organic carbon levels he has today, and where is he going, both defining the history and the trajectory going forward. So this is an example of just using those Earth Observatory satellites to develop a classified map of what was the cropping history through time. This is critically important to US growers, especially in rented lands where there may not be a well-established management history for those given fields, whether that's actual tillage practice or crop diversity or cropping intensity. Next slide, please. Well, that's somewhat of a simple problem. More complicated problems are again identifying where tillage has been used and to what intensity. This is an example of using Sentinel-2 satellite imagery to classify no-till versus conventional till soils. Of course, this is really important to helping set that baseline, so understanding where the farmer is today and where he can go. But it's also important for having a grower be a substantial participant in carbon markets through verifying that certain practice changes were actually implemented. It's the transparency aspect of this really deeply involves a grower into these programs where it can sort of seem a little sterile in the way they're actually involved. And these sorts of data techniques to help verify these practices can reduce the data burden on a grower to have to transfer this to whomever so they can truly participate in these marketplaces. But it also helps identify potential management shifts to optimize and align sort of yield benefits and ecosystem outcomes. Next slide, please. Another example is verification using these same satellites to look at cover crop, both timing, so when it was planted, when it was terminated, and cropping diversity. There are plenty of challenges here to getting these sorts of classifications accurate, and certainly need grower participation and facilitating the accuracy there. But through aggregating these labels where we have growers that are participating and they've named their cover crop, given us termination and planting and termination dates and mix histories, we can start to get better on this, and again improve that sort of transparency and confidence of a grower's credit in the marketplace, and we think that has substantial value. Next slide, please. Going directly from sort of this monitoring and verification of practices to actual quantification of soil organic carbon is not an easy task. In some ways, you could think of these practice verification techniques is quite easy compared to actually measuring soil organic carbon. As Christine pointed out in her final couple of slides, there's tremendous diversity and heterogeneity for soil organic carbon across the landscape. This is just an example of 4 different fields for a grower. The sort of squiggly polygons you see in there are basically different soil textures. And then on the base layer, you see all these different sort of dark lines, almost look like veins. Those are actually different moisture conditions. It's based on elevation to quantify wetness, soil wetness. So to really capture the diversity of these microenvironments, both of soil properties and also landscape position, cropping histories, all of these things layered together, it's quite difficult. So to scale this sort of point measurement up to something that really captures the overall landscape capability of soil organic carbon is rather difficult. We've used some statistical approaches to try to capture that variability in a reduced data set. Here we've got a couple of red and blue dots. Those indicate where we'll actually be measuring soil organic carbon, and the red dots. The blue dots will actually be doing bulk density and soil organic carbon so that we can convert the SOC percentages into carbon stocks. These types of techniques are going to be critical, both for scaling up on-ground quantification and also as inputs into process-based models, which are kind of the next step in quantification, where we do this on-the-ground collection, and then we input these things into very sophisticated biogeochemical models that will, again, sort of forecast that trajectory of soil organic carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. So I think to sum up, I want to say that there are plenty of technologies, both field techniques by trying to reduce the overall burden of field collection and laboratory analysis. You certainly can start to talk about using remote sensing like we've done in a couple of these slides here. Use of proximal sensors that would be like in-ground monitoring devices. And then you can take a hybrid approach of these where you have to do some on-the-ground quantification. Remote sensing has limitations, and proximal ground-based sensors have a spot in this overall life cycle. And then quantification at a much larger scale with process-based models. I think all of this sums up to how do we align, how do we make growers an active participant in these carbon markets, and how do we align their crop yield goals and their ecosystem outcomes. And I think that comes down to how we utilize data and analytics to provide growers with an accurate picture of both their ROI and their overall outcomes. Here's some mock-ups of things at the end that we've considered on how to tell a grower what their potential participation in these both inset and offset markets will be, by augmenting something like their nitrogen rate, by changing something like a tillage practice, and trying to get an idea of how stacking these payments for both inset and offset markets can improve their overall bottom line. Even if they're reducing yield, their overall ROI may be higher. And I think that's the take home, is that whether we're monitoring practices or quantifying soil organic carbon, we've got to realign these things with growers to make sure they're willing and active participants in these markets going forward.
Hey, this is Finn. Can I jump in with a quick question there, Joel or Klaus?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Hunter, for that. Question I have is, when we start to advance this on a policy front, one thing I wanted to bring up was both the Senate and the House hearings and the agricultural committees that happened this winter and into spring. We heard a very similar question being asked by members, which was, what do we do about farmers or ranchers who've been practicing this stuff already? How do we make sure they're rewarded? So that's combined with, you brought that up for a second, but how does this history allow them to be rewarded first and foremost, so that they're not saying, well, I might as well plow this field and lower my carbon number so I can build them back up and make more money, because we obviously don't want to harm what's already good. The second question is, how beneficial, as we scale this out nationally, would it be to start with an analysis that's showing us in as many sectors of farming and ranching as we can, in as many regions as we can, maybe this top 2% of people who are creating unbelievable performance, who have those fence line shots of their farm, as Christine showed, compared to the other, where we're able to essentially assess, maybe our recommendation of when people are terminating cover crops is too early, based on these top 2% of all the best performing people out there across the nation. Oh yeah, we got some adjustments to make, and we're getting to see where the best innovation's happening, and we can get that feedback loop to be like, wow, some of these results that we're seeing are possible in the region that someone else is saying, oh, that's never going to happen for me because that's impossible. So can you talk a little bit about rewarding past history and how we're making sure we're incentivizing people by showing the best of the best? Yeah,
thanks, Vinny. Those are great questions. Rewarding past practice is not an easy one, and certainly we've got to do some reconciling with the way carbon markets are starting to shake out and the way this would be integrated. Currently, there's some thinking that only additional practices and additional carbon sequestered would be eligible to participate in these marketplaces. And I think that's a bit of a nearsighted perspective. To Finian's point, like, why wouldn't you just till it under and get going at that point? That's obviously not what we want to incentivize. So how do we in retrospect do some quantification of of those that past practice. And a lot of it goes back to some of the same things I showed in the slides, right? We can use the long history from the 70s forward of these Earth observatory satellites to do things like classify crop diversity, tillage intensity, those types of measurements, and then use those process-based models that do that forecasting of carbon sequestered under certain practices, under certain environmental and weather conditions. We can actually run that in reverse. So you could hindcast where soil organic carbon was and what's been sequestered over time. Based on sort of ground truth point where we'd set a baseline today, and
right.
Some of the things we've seen already are that we will be the carbon markets are going to be rewarding growers for a 5-year history, but going further back, I think that's something that needs to be part of the discussion.
Another question, Hunter, that is coming up very frequently is permanence. The idea of is this carbon going to stay in the ground, and how reliable is this to issue these carbon credits?
That's a substantially difficult question. I think Christine would have a lot of input there. But from the procedures we've outlined or are currently undertaking, permanence is something we're going to be relying too heavily on for the process-based model. So we'll be using practice and environmental conditions to help determine whether those things are going to last the 100 years that we're hoping they will. I think we need to get better about depth monitoring. Remote sensing kind of breaks down when you're trying to monitor depth resolution of soil organic carbon. But there are some, both ground-based sensors and of course, in-field sampling that can be done. And then there's plenty of statistical and process-based modeling that could help there. I think one thing that's continually being omitted is looking at fractionation of soil organic matter into stable or unstable pools. That goes directly to permanence and is something I think, as a project developer in the nascent carbon markets, we're really not seeing a ton of emphasis on, and we need to get reinvested in that. But overall, I think it goes back to limited data sets and field trials on practice change over time. Those are going to have to develop, but also measurement and quantification techniques need to refocus on some of these permanence concerns and develop better techniques to measure them in the first place.
Well,
go ahead, Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I comment on permanence. Management can put it in the ground and management can take it out of the ground. It's only as permanent as the management. So, it's pretty straightforward in that if one reason why we're able to sequester carbon is because of our management practices has removed the carbon from the soil. And so when we change our practices and get more carbon in the soil, that's great. But carbon's not like some miracle thing that just once it's in the soil, it stays there. You have to maintain the management.
Yeah, that's an important point, which I'm sure we'll hear more about as the technology advances. And well, thank you.
I think it's really a policy question. Like the technology's there. We know what's permanent, what's not. It's just the question is like, what can the markets bear and how does policy deal with it? It's not a science question, permanence.
Yeah, which is why we are saying systems perspective, right? Because it really involves the entire system. Thank you, Hunter. Just a couple administrative issues. A lot of these slides may be difficult to read depending on what screen you have. We will send out the slide deck, a link to the slide deck, and we will also send you a link to the video itself. And another part here, please put your questions into the Q&A. And just as a hint or as a suggestion, if there is a question that has already been placed, you can upvote it, which then gives our team an indication this is really a question more people want to know about. So with that, let's move over and on to Hunter. Hunter is a 4th generation farmer. Operating 13,000 acres of land.
Trey, right? Yeah, Trey.
I'm sorry, Trey, by myself. I'm sorry. I was looking. Sorry, thank you. So for Trey, and so we wanted to hear from Trey, what are the what are the farming methods that you have been deploying? There are arguments, that deploying regenerative or soil health methods don't have the yield per acre that is needed to feed a growing population. That is one issue here. So what has your experience been on, and what other changes on your farm do you see going forward from here, moving from conventional to soil health practices? Maybe we can put the slides back up and then give Trey the stage here.
Yeah, thanks, Klaus. I'll go and get started. I'm a large-scale farmer. I live in the Chesapeake Bay region of Maryland on the eastern shore of the Bay. And I like to describe, I'm going to kind of tell my journey of how I got to where I am with the sustainable farming or ecological farming, carbon smart farming, whatever you want to call it, because it all kind of runs in parallel with soil health and environmental footprint. I like to call it ecological farming, and I like to use a lot of technology. I like the word ecology or ecological because it's the relationship of organisms to one another and to their physical surroundings. So I think that that's what we're doing as farmers. And I think as we start into this regenerative journey, we're starting to look holistically at the system around us. And we're really in control of the organisms and how they relate to one another. So it's a weird juxtaposition as a farmer because we're trying to encourage this natural system, but by the same token, we've always been taught to control it. So I think that's part of the mindset of the farmer. Next slide, please. I don't like the word sustainable. You hear that all the time, and it's the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level in perpetuity. And I don't think that that describes farming. I think if we look at the way food has been grown and the way we've changed over the last decade or 2 decades, and the fast pace of change that's projected to be in the next decade, I don't think that maintenance is adequate. I think as the climate changes and the weather patterns change, we need constant evolving. And I think we need a more dynamic word than sustainability. I think sustainable is very boring. I think that we need something that indicates the amount of technology, the amount of interest, and the amount of passion that's being put into this food production system that needs to be maintained. So that's why I like ecological or regenerative, but I didn't want to go regenerative in a lecture with Finian because I'm sure he and I could debate the definitions there for years. I did a recent essay on Medium about what I think regenerative should mean. And I think it needs to be, to me, it should be more of a philosophy than a definition, but that's a whole nother lecture.
Totally agree with that.
I think it needs to be a bunch of people writing papers and coming up with ideas together that would then be amassed by an anonymous author that would then present them. I think kind of in a Taoist approach, but I think that way it would become more philosophical and have a lot more movement and a lot more flow to it, so that it could be more adaptable across multiple facets of farming and multiple disciplines and globally and everything. But anyway, carbon smart farming is why we're here. Next slide, please. And to me, that's pretty simple. It's no-till, it's cover crops, it's living roots all year to maximize sunlight, and it's sequestering carbon into the soil. The scientists obviously can cover this much better than I have and have done a wonderful job, but that's what I'm doing. So this is a picture of me planting. It's a bit unconventional that shows us planting directly into cover crops that we would then terminate with herbicides. Next slide, please. So how did I get to that point? Well, it started about 15 years ago. Probably my own slide, but George is a gentleman that helped raise me. He's been on my team. My father hired him and he's worked with me ever since. So we were doing cover crops because we were paid to by the state of Maryland to pull nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water that goes into the Chesapeake Bay. Didn't believe in them, but I joined it because I was getting paid to do it. A little bit of greenwashing, I suppose, but I figured I'd try it. But then through observations, we've become believers in it. So one year, what we would do is we would plant the cover crops after our corn or beans. They would grow through the winter. And then in March, we would spray them just as fast as we could so that when we went to plant the ground, it was clean. It didn't have anything growing in it. It's what a farmer considers clean. And one year we didn't get a field sprayed, but we had sprayed 2 passes in it. So we had sprayed a portion of the field, but not all of it. So part of it was still green and probably about knee high. So something we had never planted into before. And I talked to George. I was on one planter, he was driving another. And I said, George, why don't we go try and plant that? He looked at me, and George's a grumpy guy, right? Picture like a stereotypical older agriculturalist that's just kind of grumpy and gruff, works with his hands, doesn't like to be around people, likes solitude. And he goes to try it, and he calls me and says, Trey, you got to come look at this. And I figured we had a mess. It was probably too wet, too tangled up on the planter. It's just going to be a mess. And I go out there and I look, and he goes where we'd already sprayed, where it was brown, where it looked correct, where it was what we wanted, this blank canvas. It was wet, it was muddy. The soil wasn't at equilibrium. It was not fit to plant. In other words, it was not plantable for basic agronomic reasons. But as soon as we got to where it was green and the cover crop was living and thriving, the soil was fit, it was at equilibrium. So what that did was it was an epiphany for both of us, not at the time, because we were just in a hurry to get the corn planted and we wanted to keep moving. But in reflecting on it later, we both realized that everything we had learned, everything that we had been taught through farming, through multiple years of experience, I was 10 years in, George was 30 years in, was having to be rethought. So next slide, please. So if you look at what I thought of as a child when I wanted to be a farmer, it was this. It was a blank field. So if you picture it, I equate it to art, right? So if you're a painter, this would be the blank canvas, clearly defined lines, a smell. It's, I guess, the release of carbon, right? Soil smells wonderful when you till it. The sight of the tractors running, big machinery, the dust flying, the sound of the engines, the taste is there's even a taste in the air that smells fresh. You get down, you feel the soil, it feels like a sponge as you walk across it. It's just an awesome feeling, and it's very romantic, and it's very much the reason why I wanted to farm. It's why I chose my profession. That's why I'm following in the family tradition and what I really wanted to do and what I loved about farming. So if you go to the next slide, you can see what we're doing today. This is much different. So it's a very high-tech planter, but you can see we're planting through cover crops. So this is very different. And I think people lose sight of how different it is. It sounds very easy. You know, why doesn't the farmer just change? And this is an entirely different experience. So now when I walk in my fields, I hear birds buzzing, bees buzzing, birds chirping. And even when you you're stepping on green stems, we're stepping across things that the soil is alive, there's bugs, there's critters. And in the past, I would have always been taught, kill the bugs, kill the critters, you don't want those. Now, when we go to paint, we're painting on a canvas that's already been painted. It's been painted naturally, and it's constantly evolving and constantly changing. And then we're having to take our seeds, put them in, and flow with that painted canvas that's constantly evolving. So the mindset is very much different than what we used to do. And I think that I've often struggled, and I think a lot of farmers struggle with that change of mindset from this ultimate control, sterile environment to one where you lack control and you give up some of that control, but still want to make a profit and still grow high yields. And it can be done, and I do it, and I'm very happy that I do it. But I think that people don't realize the amount of change that it requires psychologically and socially for the farmer compared to what it is. Next slide, please. So as we look at this and we have a renewed interest in food production, which I think is terrific. So it's a bit of a renaissance. So the revival, renewed interest, consumer outreach, climate change, nutrient loading, social. So the question now becomes, what does the Renaissance farmer look like? Is he more balanced than the old school farmer? Does he have to have social change? Do we need consumer driven demand so that farmers become more balanced and they look at things a little differently? And I think that's something that we need to really think about and ponder as we look towards leadership and we look towards these carbon markets and consumer markets. Next slide, please. So I like to look at sustainability a little differently than most. I look at it as one's level of desire to make the world a better place. So I'm meditating on sustainability. I think that's where we are. So right now we're expecting farmers to change, and we're expecting farmers to change their livelihood, to change the way that they make their living and take that risk. But there has to be a desire in place. So I think as the desire increases for all of society, so too will farmers. But as that balance becomes out of whack, we expect farmers to rise this fast versus society. We're all in it kind of together. So I think that programs like this are what shows it. Next slide, please. Because if you look at the farmer and he looks at his environmental footprint, this is just a flow chart that me and my team did one day. I mean, this was like 10 minutes and it got so complicated. So you have the environment, you have agronomy, you have climate, you have social, and you have financial, all combining in this complex environment to small scale farmers that are family farms. So we're not talking about boards of directors. We're not talking about C-class suites. We're talking about guys and gals that get dirty every day and really don't have time to design flow charts. I mean, this was a wintertime project. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a great slide. I think it really shows the regenerative nature of farming, or what it can be. You've got the cover crops breaking down, you've got new cover crops growing, and you've got the corn there still living but dying, and that we're about to harvest. Next slide, please. And I think that we all are in this for one reason. This is my children. So this is how I educate my children. So when I was a kid, I grew up fixing tractors, right? It was very mechanical. It was wrenches, it was air wrenches, it was welding, it was torching, it was getting dirty. Now I'm trying to teach my kids, whether or not they farm or not, they don't have a lot of interest, but maybe they will, is what are cover crops like? What are the fields like? What's the joy in this ecological system that we're flowing with? Next slide, please. So kind of my mantra, why I got involved in all this is I really believe this, and I think that it holds true for all of us, is that many small people who in many small places do many small things that can alter the face of the world, which I think right now is particularly pertinent to farmers. So as each farmer makes a change, and each time folks like yourselves give us incentives to change, that each one of those little incremental changes will make a big difference. Thanks.
Thank you.
Wow, that was incredibly inspirational, Trey. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we probably agree way more. And I'm glad you brought it up really quick. On a side note, is I get that there's this, what is regenerative? Because there's a lot of people tagging it for their own long-term use. But every time I'm in the field or at events with farmers and ranchers who are doing the work, it's such huge alignment with this is we're a part, we're moving to a stewardship mentality. We're a part of helping this heal. We're a part of this. And that's what a lot of their lives have been about and wanting to be about. And it's such a great convergence. So just on another day, we'll have that discussion, but I have a feeling from everything you said that we're way aligned.
Gotcha.
That was beautiful. And really, I just want to acknowledge that this is it, folks. This is what's possible and happening. Minds at a time are seeing this. And I have a question for Trey we're going to get to later about how can each of these advocates out here work with farmers better and not have this polarization or antagonistic approach. So over to you, Klaus. Can I ask a question to you, Klaus? Is that all right?
Bet.
So as farmers are taking on new methods like cover cropping, integrating livestock, or adding a myriad of other crops into their farming systems, and really stacking enterprises and taking advantage of, adding grass-fed chickens or hogs or cattle or whatever, how is the private and public sectors that are connected to food and fiber production or putting out there for people to eat, helping to create actual demand for new products and help farmers to have viable markets? Because this is going to be change for farmers. And if they don't have access to somewhere to deliver these goods, there's a big stunt. So talk to us about, you have a huge background in the food procurement side of things, and I wanted to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, of course, the farmer needs a market to sell into, as you change your types of crops, particularly when you think about only 12% of row croppers at this point are using cover crops, and out of the 12%, most of them terminate the crop before it matures, whereas in most cuisines around the world have cover crops integrated into their diet. It's just food systems are far more seasonal in other parts of the world. But the good news is, we already see many communities stepping up to this and around the country. We see adjustments of menus for school meal programs as an example, with an emphasis on sourcing fresh produce from local farmers. Institutional food service in universities, hospitals, corporate canteens are also starting to adjust their sourcing strategies to support local farmers and processors. So that is happening, and communities have control over that. They can stipulate sourcing practices. We see independent restaurants creating partnerships with local farmers. Here in Bend, we have 23 breweries who partner with local farmers to grow their hops and their grains. So they update their menus to reflect a local cuisine, which I think is wonderful, because when we travel, the first thing you want to experience is local cuisine, local restaurants. What's unique about this? It's enormously important in the tourist sector also to have a great restaurant system. And when you think about cities that you travel to, like San Francisco, Chicago, they're all such unique restaurants. And these independent restaurant operators are really dialing in with their local farm community. There's a lot of happening in the snack industry, starting to introduce products that are specifically linking health claims with the ingredients being used. So in general, we can say that the public has become aware of the linkage between the food we eat and our personal health. And that's becoming, you know, a really symbiotic issue. And they're looking for products that are nutrient dense on the one hand and free of chemicals. So we should mention the Menus of Change initiative. If you go online and type Menus of Change, has been created by the Culinary Institute of America in partnership with Harvard School of Public Health. It's a wonderful program. They're working with corporate chefs and procurement managers for the large chains to bring awareness to the need to adjust our menus, you know, to reflect both personal health and responsible sourcing strategies. So the awareness in the industry is growing. You know, chefs are being trained. Companies are setting standards for themselves to support farmers who want to transition into a regenerative soil health kind of practice, but need markets for their products to sell into. That requires a lot of planning when you think about it. You know, these things typically go in 1-2 year cycles ahead of actually putting a crop into the ground. I would say overall, this is, you know, an exciting time of change and innovation for the entire industry. It's an amazing opportunity for startups with new ideas and concepts, and many of them are ready to scale. You know, the finance industry is dialing in, so we see a lot of energy in this sector. I would say that's like super encouraging.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, because we have so many people who are active advocates that work with you all, and this is where, you know, there's the push for potential carbon markets that we've been talking about. But as we look forward to the Farm Bill, Kiss the Ground is hoping to work with all of you on an initiative that's really focused on reformation of the Farm Bill, making it more available. And this area is one particular area that is really crucial that we look into, is food procurement, incentivizing it. States across the country are starting to look at this too, of how are we actually taking and allocating funds for institutional purchasing from hospitals, et cetera. So a lot of room for advocacy to win here, and have small wins at townships, cities, municipalities, that you can actually work with local decision makers and have a big impact. And then of course, join together on these bigger initiatives for federal stuff. But thanks for sharing that, Klaus. It's really huge. I want to emphasize that activism on this side is going to have a lot of wins, and it's going to be what makes farmers trust this movement too, because they're going to be supported to take these steps.
And it's local. It has to start community level, because the agriculture itself is regional local. The adaptations have to be on a regional level. So we would like to transition over to a Q&A from here, but Finian, give us a wrap up of, we have talked about a lot of things, and what have you heard us say so far?
I feel lucky to get the wrap up opportunity. This has been really exceptional. Yeah, the first thing I want to just throw out there that I was hearing in Kristen and Hunter and Trey was really this biomimicry. Behind it all is kind of this painting, like what Trey's saying, is like, wait, there's a way we can do this. And lo and behold, it's like nature's epic design that we can work with better. So that's just the big thing I wrote over here. Other thing that what Kristen was talking about is the super sponge thing. I was reminded while she was speaking about Gabe Brown, 30-inch rainfall. He's able to absorb 30 inches an hour, and his neighbor is only able to infiltrate a half an inch per hour. If you see in Kiss the Ground, there's that fence line shot with Gabe Brown, his land, and his neighbor's land. But that's just so profound. So that just like the epicness that we have before us, and that's why I'm so inspired and wake up every day to be a part of this movement, is that this can happen. We know because there's farmers like Trey and Gabe Brown, these other folks who do this, and it's an opportunity for all of us. Hunter talking about this situation with monitoring, and I think the thing I heard there was, we got to make sure we do this right. There's going to be an exorbitant amount of money potentially coming from the government to help make this happen, because people have been pushing it. It makes sense. We can do it right. We can set up substantially to make sure at-depth monitoring isn't breaking the bank, or the tests, I mean, for high-level soil testing where it needs to happen. We can get the satellite data that we need. We can correlate data that's going to be helpful for farmers. What's possible? I've dove headfirst into this, and it's not nearly as far as Hunter or Christine have, but it's amazing what we can do if we get the substantial support. So that's what I heard there from both of them is we can do this well with the direction of the scientists and the farmers, or we can do this and have 10 years from now, all of us feel like we made a mistake and not taking it seriously enough. And that comes into, are we looking at real-time data? Where are we looking at flooding and drought happening today? Are we seeing who's successful, who's not? Are we helping get major funding for media for saying, hey, we're going to help farmers reduce your runoff, increase your infiltration, all that stuff. The thing that I got from Trey is, I said it before, but I do agree that there's a world of regenerative that is very much exactly what he was talking about. And what we all are up against collectively is making sure that we connect with, I don't know if this is proper, but the OGs, and this includes indigenous peoples. This includes farmers who've been rocking this for years and years. We have to connect with the people who have either culturally been in this mindset, the holistic practitioners, and the scientists who are leading on this, so that when we talk about what regenerative means, it doesn't set itself up for greenwashing. The word regenerative means something, the word agriculture means something. Marry the two, and we should be pretty able to defend ourselves from extreme corporate interests who don't get this or are trying to greenwash. We have to hold to what's at the essence of these. And everything we've done at Kiss the Ground, when we've gone in deep with everyone who's been leading on this, it is there. And we have to bring ourselves together, because some of these corporate interests are going to want to paint it in their own way, possibly. Maybe they'll get on board. That's also possible. So a lot of influence we can have there. And I think that this is what Trey was talking about is so crucial. The last point I have here is the breakthrough for farmers is possible, Klaus. And why and how we're setting up for that is so crucial, because what Trey described was he and his colleague had a moment. And where are we working on creating the conditions that more of those moments are happening for farmers? Because I know I try this on every day. Tell me to change. What is my natural reactions going to be? Get away from me. I don't want to hear it. But when I get to discover something on my own, I get to hear it. What are the conditions that let me learn, let me explore new possibilities? We always have to be cognizant of that. Otherwise, we can push people away and make separations happen. But those possibilities of aha moments are available to everyone, really. And how are we being humble? How are we having availability for our own aha moments, and then making conditions for others to have that? So that'll be my little wrap up. But this has been phenomenal. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Finian. Yeah, well, let's move over to the first question I have here is from Bruce Cooper. And he wants to know, what is the scale of the upfront financial need to switch from traditional farming to regenerative agriculture? Does the American Jobs Act have funds dedicated to this financial hump? I think we'll give that to Trey.
We use all the same equipment. There's some planter attachments, but really it's just a matter of changing your planter around, and it actually requires, in many ways, less equipment. The financial part of it is the equipment to plant the cover crop. So typically we have the equipment. It's just that now during harvest, you're doubling down. So you're taking the time when we need the most labor, which is harvest and corn harvest, because you're harvesting, you're hauling, you're storing, you're doing all these different tasks. And now you're throwing in a planting season on top of it. So that's probably the biggest impediment to me, is one, getting, obviously I get a financial incentive to do cover crops through my state, but there's also federal money for that as well. But it's taking the burden of harvest and then trying to add a whole nother part of it. For me, there's been some young folks that have started subcontracting in Maryland. So I hire a young guy that does a significant amount of my cover crops, just to take the burden off me. But the financial incentive from the state allows me more freedom and the opportunity to hire this young guy who has started that as a business.
And if I can add something, we work with Senator Booker on adjustments to his recent bill, making things more broadly available, because and advertising and such. So, doing roller crimpers, making those more available, so it's possible. It's not just like, yeah, that sounds great, can't do it. How are we making it so certain equipment is actually more consistently available across the board in different contexts in different regions. So that's something that can happen in farm bill stuff, legislation. And so I just wanted to throw out that, like, sometimes it's these certain things that are impeding adoption just because they're not available.
Yeah. Anyone else wants to comment on this? If not, we'll go to the next question.
I do have one more thing that's really important. This comes straight from Ray Archuleta's mouth, him saying, we got to make it clear that this isn't a 6-year process. Both the Senate and the House Ag Committee hearings, we're talking about how regenerative ag takes 6 years to have success and financial payback. No, you can. There's been advances in that. Everyone's not starting when Trey started, not by themselves. Like, you can do this right. You can get the right training and have input cost reduction savings so significantly that year 1, year 2, year 3, you're making money more than you've ever made before by transitioning to regenerative ag. So I just wanted to throw that out from the folks who actually train the farmers. More than half of their farmers in year 2 are making more money because of their savings.
I want to add to that. There's a report put out by SARE, S-A-R-E. I don't have it up right now, but it was a really nice analysis based on data about how long it takes cover crops to pay farmers. And it was 2 to 5 years based on different situations of, what's happening on the ground. So there's some really nice data out there that can, give informed decisions on the cost and the time lag of return on investment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and then coming back to,
I'll see if I can find it and I'll post it.
Once you change the entire system, meaning that now the restaurants, the caterers, the food industry has also shifted to these new practices or using these new products, you don't want to go back. I mean, you just have reached a different plateau altogether. So the next question, Trey, they're still picking on you. Do you still terminate the cover crop after planting into it? How long after planting? And then let me add the question to it. Do you plan on turning cover crops into cash crops eventually?
I don't plan on turning cover crops into cash crops. I mean, we grow wheat and barley, which are essentially cover crops that we harvest. And I would say the only way that I would harvest the cover crops would be through grazing. I don't know that I would ever physically harvest them because you remove a lot of the nutrients. A lot of what I want out of the cover crops is the biomass that's on top of the ground to break down back into the soil and keep it covered. By harvesting them as a green crop, you're then uncovering the soil and leaving it exposed to the elements, which we try to never do. So when we roll down the cover crops, that leaves the soil covered, and then the residue from our corn or soybeans then recovers that ground so that it's never exposed, because I feel like that's where you lose probably the most potential to lose biological activity in the soil. So the grazing would be ideal, but I'm not really an animal person, and people confuse farmers and they don't realize that a row crop farmer and an animal farmer are two entirely different people. It might as well be a stockbroker and a farmer. It's just two entirely different mindsets, right? So it'd be a really a learning curve for me to start to get animals and start learning animal husbandry and whatnot. That's neither here nor there. Right now, we're still using herbicides to terminate the cover crops. We're experimenting with doing them later after planting. With corn, we typically do it day of. Corn, you can run into some issues with shading and some nutrient tie-up and different things, and carbon to nitrogen ratios, which tie up the nitrogen. Beans, a lot of times we'll let them go for a while. We experiment with roller crimpers. We've got one on a planter, and then we've also built one. And every year we try to do 3 or 4 fields without herbicides. But to date, I've never really had extreme success with that. So we've lowered our herbicide rates, which I think is one of the savings. We haven't really lowered a whole lot of fertility. We're starting to, but a lot of times as the legumes grow, so does the cereal. So your carbon to nitrogen ratio goes up. So you need to supplement a little bit of nitrogen in there. And I agree with what the point Finian made at the beginning of his talk, was that we don't really understand the soil. There's just so much in soil biology that's not covered by basic agronomy. And the risk aversion as a farmer, last year when prices were exceptionally low, I didn't want to take a chance, because what if, I've got such tight margins. This year, it's, the prices are very high. And I'm like, well, this is my year to win the lottery. I better not screw up again. So I'm like, at what point do I really want to take that risk? Because there's no happy medium. If prices are low, I don't want to. And if prices are high, I don't want to. So we're roller crimping. We're trying that. But there's timing issues there where I like plant timing. to me trumps roller timing, and trying to figure out how to balance the two of them in conjunction is kind of where I am in that thought process, but not pursuing it exceptionally aggressively.
Okay. Ander, do you have a perspective on cover crops? And Christine, if you're,
Yeah, I don't know that I have a ton else to add to Trey's perspective, but I think finding a way to have even community integration in animal agriculture, I think, could be important. To Trey's point that having that grazing turn in on a grain farmer just doesn't make sense. It's really quite foreign. So I think there are some creative ways that we can do that from a community aspect instead of from a trying to be a siloed farmer. But I would reemphasize that even as a grain farmer, Trey is directly impacting the animal protein side of supply chain. So cover crops, even though he's not harvesting them directly, as he cycles that into his grain, it certainly plays in.
Okay. All right. So another question for Trey: how have your corn yields, soil treatments, and resulting profits per acre been impacted by change in practice? So your yields and profits per acre.
I feel like my bean and wheat yields have increased with lower inputs. My corn yields are stagnant to maybe slightly behind. And a lot of that just has to do with corn. It's imperative that each kernel comes up at the exact same time. So it's imperative that the depth of the kernel is exactly the same all the way across the field. So as you run through tall covers, you get so much variation due to the root structure and the root mass and the mass of the cover crops. But profitability, I think I'm more profitable than I was. I don't know how that compares with other farmers, because every farmer, is conditioned. Each business is run a little differently, but we've eliminated all our tillage. So you're talking 3 passes across the field at $30 a piece is $90. We've lowered our herbicide costs because we're not using nearly the insecticides. We've dropped our insecticides by 2/3. We've dropped our herbicides by probably 30%. And fertility, we're starting to use less, but I haven't really pursued that a whole lot. So I think that overall I'm more profitable. I have better access to my fields because we have better water infiltration. I'm able to work more days, and that allows me to have less overtime, which is a bonus for me and my kids. Making it to sports and stuff, we're able to take off more time because we're working more days because the fields aren't laying wet. To Christine's picture that had the puddle in the field, that farmer is going to be out till Friday, whereas the farmer on the right, where the water infiltrated, is probably working Tuesday and Wednesday while the other guy's still waiting.
Okay. So
can I add to that, Klaus? Soil Health Institute did 100 interviews of corn and soy farmers in the Midwest. And of the 100 partial budgets that we did, farmers that adopted no tillage and sometimes cover crops, but most of them were no-till adopters, they increased their net farm income by $52 per acre for corn and $45 per acre for soybean. And a lot of that was not contained within increased yields. It was, as Trey talked about, decreased labor and fuel costs.
Something at FBN, because we have a network of farmers. One thing we've been evaluating is yield resiliency to severe drought or other adverse conditions that definitely have seen that on the low dips, the dips are much lower for growers using cover crops and reduced tillage. So that's another thing to factor in.
Okay, so then we have a range of questions about biochar. Terra preta, so that stays in the soil for 2,500 years. Where are we with biochar and applying it to large fields, cost effective? Christine, is that one for you?
I can just make a comment about it. Biochar can improve soil physical and chemical properties, but only in soils, mostly sandy soils. That's what the literature says. When you're considering about, claiming biochar as carbon sequestration, you have to recognize that, like, the creation of the biochar, the plant material, that used photosynthesis. But after that, it was harvested, it's transported, fossil fuels are used to pyrolyze it, and then it's transported back to the field, and then usually you have to inject it or till it. So it's got a footprint beyond that of photosynthesis. So it's just, you know, something to consider.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just echo it. It's a tool that is contextually relevant, but not applicable to every farmer whatsoever. It does work sometimes, some places, in some contexts is better than others. But it's kind of like when we get into the situation where we say, oh, okay, how are we shipping compost to every farm? That's a great idea for application, of course, and we should definitely do that more. But biochar is even further behind that, as everything Christian mentioned in terms of the production of it. But when we really start to get into regenerative and the optimal scenario, we're looking at how farmers are taking a piece of land and helping it to do its maximization of everything possible. And that's where, if I can throw another question to the group really quick, this is on the paramount importance of education, where, you know, Trey is describing his journey into this, and there are so many farmers who are interested in getting involved, ranchers who are interested in getting involved in this. How do you three see the disbursement and how legislation or farm bill work can be much more constructive in deploying the education to the farmers and ranchers of the people they actually want to learn from, instead of them just hunting down YouTube or going to a random conference? How can we get the best of the best in the field who are proving this time and time again, working with farmers all over the place, first and foremost, making sure these farmers are successful financially? How are we going to deploy that? How important is it making available that education for these kind of early adopter farmers and ranchers?
I
Okay.
seem to have worked on Trey. But, you know, so you see the process working with early adopters such as Trey. And then the question is, how do you get the rest? Trey, what do you think?
Well, for me, it was social pressure, honestly, that it was the environmental community in the Chesapeake Bay region, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Riverkeepers, by joining those groups, because my landowners were members of those groups. You know, my bosses are my owners. They're the ones that allow me to make a living. So when I saw that they were on the top donor list, or several of them were, I was forced to join those groups to explore them. And I did so with an open mind, and it was reciprocated on both sides. But I would say that that was a big part of my journey. And I think that same journey will be had when we start to have consumer education. You know, we get the carbon markets going, we produce a transparent market that's validated, whether it's FBN or whoever. You know, we take this sound science and we validate the farmer that's doing things well and putting carbon into the soil. And then that becomes an entry point into a consumer good, where hopefully the consumer is willing to pay a couple percent more for that food that has a lower footprint. And that couple percent, rather than going to the national, you know, the multinationals, actually flows back to the farmer. So if you paid 2% more for bread, of which I receive 5% of the money for the wheat, 2% on the bread actually equates to about a 10% increase in my wheat price. Well, 10% in wheat price is huge, right? So if my wheat's worth $500 coming off the field, $50 on top of a carbon market, on top of an environmental market, and you stack these traits to the farmers for financial incentives for doing this social good, I call it a social good, ecological good. But I think it starts a lot with consumer education, and it kind of goes back to that model of sustainability where we do it as a group and it's collective, rather than just the farmer out there isolated being educated or whatever. He's not doing it. But for me, it was a matter of joining these groups who, you know, if we were riding, they were putting their hands on my back, right? You know, I mean, it wasn't just me leading the pack the whole time. It was, hey, Trey, let's support you. Let's change places in the Peloton. Let's keep it going. And for me, I think that's what needs to be done collectively, globally or nationally in particular, so that the consumers know where their food's coming from. The farmer that's proud of what he does gets to display that, whether it's Walmart or the farmer's market, and therefore gets compensated for it. So that's kind of my, probably a little more than what anyone was asking for, but anyway.
So we're flat out of time. It went very fast. We actually have a lot of people dialing in from Brazil, from Europe, from all over the world, which is, you know, fantastic. And there are unfortunately a lot of questions we weren't able to get to, but we will send out a follow-up email with a copy of the video with the slides, and we will provide a communication channel for anyone to, if you want to connect with Finian or with Trey or with Christine or Hunter. we'll provide you with access there. I just wanted to, and Trey, I'm going to give you the last word for summing up here because you're doing wonderful. But I just wanted to really thank business climate leaders for giving us this platform and giving and for all the team members here who have made this event happen. Joel and Sarah and Julie, Nancy, Ricky. I hope I covered everyone who have really stepped up. We've worked on this for quite a while, and so my sincere thanks to everyone who made that happen, and to our panel. You guys are awesome. That was really very informative for me as well. How about Trey and Finian? You want to wrap it up with some closing comments?
Can I ask my question to Trey? There were so many beautiful questions here. Can we copy and paste these questions, Klaus or Joel, so that we have access to them? I'd love to see them in case I want to pop in and answer some of these because they're brilliant questions. But Trey, I want to throw this over to you because we have activists from all over the world here. You had talked about this a bit throughout this webinar today, but can you share with folks again, just a reminder of we can do this together, and that means with farmers and what you just talked about. How, in terms of the messages you shared with us on our pre-call, can you remind these folks that when we're interacting with farmers, when we're engaging, what are some ways that are going to bring farmers in versus push them away and shut them down?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Where I live, it started out very combative, and I was very pessimistic in joining the environmental community, to be honest. But what I found out was that I'd say my big epiphany was that we both had mutual passion. Farmers are very passionate about what they do. It's ingrained in them. There's a reason why they do it. If you don't love the job, you won't do it, because there's a lot of, the hours are bad, the stress is, there's all kinds of things I could complain about with any type of farming, but we love it. And I found that the environmental community is much the same way. They're often volunteers, or they're people that are way overqualified for what they're getting paid, and they're very passionate about what they're doing. So if you have mutual passion, it provides two things. It provides either a very combative approach, or you can have extremely good collaborations based on that shared passion for the environment and being outside. So to me, that's the biggest thing. And a lot of the approaches, I think that people forget that, I think 98% of farms in America are family farms, right? There's very few first generation farmers, and those that are usually have some type of influence from someone else that they grew up with. So if you go in and you tell a farmer that tillage is bad and they're doing tillage, you don't realize that you're insulting their family, right? It may be subconscious, but basically when I started to transition my farm to this different style of farming, I could sense tension with my father. And I think a lot of that tension was him thinking that, hey, here's this young guy coming in and telling me what I did was wrong, rather than embracing that, hey, we did the best we could. We've always had sound practices. It's time to improve. And once I kind of adjusted my approach, I found that same context held true for the environmental community, where it was, hey, let's improve, but let's not judge what's being done currently.
Yeah, room for everyone to grow. Thank you for that.
Opinion, last word.
Yeah, I just want to really acknowledge all of us, all the folks on the call, and everyone out there who's watching. The work that Soil Health Institute is doing is incredible, and they're really allowing for this solid research to be accessible for policymakers. So those of you who are out there who are ready to get engaged with this, we're here. We're your partners in this. Kiss the Ground's getting ready for a really big initiative around the Farm Bill. So look out for that. We'll be in touch with you for that. There's a lot to learn, and there's so many people who have been here and working with these folks who are on the cutting edge. And I'm imploring each of you to step out, make bold requests to talk with folks. Surprisingly, this industry of the soil health regenerative movement, there's amazingly generous people who want to help you be an empowered advocate. So it's not that I'm telling you to go take their time, but if you want to learn, if you want to get more engaged, we're all here to support you, as are the folks who you might put up on a pedestal of being the best of this. They're all championing you to champion this movement. So yeah, that's really it for me, Klaus, is that this is an incredible opportunity. The regenerative ag soil health movement, if you're just getting into it, this is much bigger than the online world was back in the day when that was a big thing to get involved in. This is huge. This to me is the next future that humanity is going to take on is regenerative stewardship through everything from business to our practical daily lives. So big opportunities to get involved and have huge impacts. So ready to join all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Christine, thank you very much. Hunter, thank you guys. All right, bye-bye. We're signing off and we'll follow up. Bye-bye.